So our first speaker, Laura McGowan, and the title of her presentation, Access for All, Results of the 5th International Conference on Responsible Tourism in Destination. Laura is the founder and director of International Center for Responsible Tourism Canada, an organization committed to the development and awareness of responsible tourism in Canada. Via ICRT Canada, Laura is an active advocate for the responsible development of tourism, including making tourism inclusive for all. Laura holds a BA Leisure Tourism and Society, specializing in ecotourism and cultural heritage studies from the University of Calgary, and an MSc's Responsible Tourism Management from the University of Greenwich. So, please.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Okay, perfect. I first want to start to see how many people in the room know what responsible tourism is. A couple. Okay, good. Essentially, when we talk about responsible tourism, the quote we tend to use to generalize what we mean is making better places for people to live in and making better places for people to visit. So we look at tourism development as a means of community development as well. So we have to take into consideration the local people before we bring tourism to the destination. And that quote comes from our original guiding document called the Cape Town Declaration that was written back in 2002. More specifically, there are guiding principles of responsible tourism. I won't go into detail with all of these, and the full Cape Town Declaration is available on our website as well as the Central International Center for Responsible Tourism website. But I guess that the pieces that are most applicable to accessibility are the third point on this slide, that is involving local people in the decisions that affect their lives and their life chances, that the people who live in the destination need to contribute to making their destination more accessible. But I'll point down to point 3 on this one, on this slide, that says that it provides access for physically challenged people. So note this was written back in 2002. The ICRT Canada specifically stands for International Centre for Responsible Tourism Canada. We launched back in 2008 on World Responsible Tourism Day. World Responsible Tourism Day takes place alongside the World Travel Market. I heard somebody mention that yesterday, where there's discussions around different topics that have to do with the responsible development of tourism, of which accessibility has become a topic. In 2011, we hosted the 5th International Conference on Responsible Tourism and Destinations in Edmonton, Alberta, which, if you're not familiar with Canadian geography, it is on the west side of Canada, about a 4.5-hour flight from Montreal, where the Canadian Rocky Mountains are located. So the Responsible Tourism and Destinations conferences, started in 2002 in Cape Town, South Africa. There was a bit of a wait until the second conference, but they've pretty much been annually since then. At each of these conferences, they've talked about different topics that have to do with the local destination, topics that are important to the organizers of the conference, and specific topics to that conference. So, for example, in Belize, cruise tourism was really important. In Edmonton, I'll move forward. There's a picture of Edmonton, the city that I live in, and where we hosted the conference. In Edmonton, we chose themes that were applicable to Alberta specifically, but also to Canada in general. So themes that hadn't yet been discussed, but needed to have a discussion around it. So access for all was one of those topics, and I'll go into more detail on that particular one. Local economic development in developed countries. Often the discussion around responsible tourism has to do with developing nations. So we decided to look at it from a developed country point of view. Indigenous tourism, particularly in Alberta, we have a large population of Indigenous peoples, and we had some dancers come and showcase their skill and talent for us one evening. Polar tourism, so in the Canadian context, up in the Arctic, but we did have people come and talk about Antarctica as well. Governance. What does it mean to develop tourism? Whose role is it to do what? Whose responsibility is it to do what when it comes to developing tourism? And we looked at youth engagement. How do we get the youth engaged in the tourism industry in wanting to make the change for the future? So we had 193 participants out at our conference, representing 20 different countries, and it was co-chaired by myself and Harold Goodwin, who is the guru of responsible tourism, as much as he hates me saying that, but he's the one who helped start this whole movement, and he's based out of the International Centre for Responsible Tourism in the UK, which is now in Manchester. So I wanted to start this video. I don't know if I can with this clicker. Okay, I'll let you go watch it first.
I'm at the William Watson Lodge in Alberta, Canada, where they have a variety of different facilities for disabled people. So let's have a look at one of the cabins behind me to see exactly what they have.
Had to go to Canada, heard about it in a song. Vast place called to her, this is where you belong. Your simple heart is buried here in Saskatchewan. Calgary and Ottawa, in the French words on your tongue. As we sailed from port, my sister cried, and the world became so small that night. Then I worried that my mother lied, but I brushed my doubts aside.
So as this video is playing, I'll explain a bit because I know Craig's not talking any further. We sent Craig, who was one of our speakers, out into the Rockies to have an independent wilderness experience to get his feedback on the experience, and this is the video he created as a result of that one evening trip. You'll see in the video he had the chance to see wildlife, a bear, a mama bear with her cubs, which for anybody that's a rare sighting, but for somebody in a chair to be able to have that close encounter was pretty spectacular and very a huge impression for him. Just at the end of the video there was a moose. I can tell you, I have lived in Canada my whole life. I have never seen a moose. So he had quite the unique experience. But the reason why we wanted to send him out there, it was kind of a way for us to have an informal audit. So he flew into Calgary, which is 3 hours away from Edmonton to the south, and Kananaskis, where that lodge is, which is an accessible lodge, is what it's put out there as. It's about an hour and a half from the Calgary airport. So as he arrived, there was no transportation, so we had to have somebody from the park staff come pick him up. So through this audit, we were able to see where we were not meeting our expectations as a destination in Alberta. So specifically, the declaration mentions, at the end of the conference, we had all the speakers come together and the participants to tell us, what does responsible tourism with accessibility, what does that look like? What do we need to do to move forward to create a more inclusive destination? And it's important to point out that, and this is the verbiage directly from the declaration, that for the first time at the International Conferences on Responsible Tourism and Destinations, there was a discussion about accessibility. So even though it was in the Cape Town Declaration in 2002, it had never been discussed at one of the conferences before. There are just a couple of points that have to do with what came out of the discussions. The first one recognizes that previous declarations on responsible tourism have not encompassed the diversity of people with different disabilities. So as I pointed out in the Cape Town Declaration, it only mentioned physical challenges. It didn't expand beyond that. So in the discussions that we had in Edmonton, it talked about that there is a diversity of needs out there, not just mobility. It demands that tourism providers place priority on ensuring access is available to everyone. And I'm sure there's nobody here who would disagree with that. Providers must be clear and concise in providing information about what facilities are available to people with disabilities in a variety of formats to ensure they are accessible to all. When we had our speakers come in and we arranged for accommodation, accessible accommodation, we soon learned that that was not the case, that where they said it was an accessible room, it wasn't actually an accessible room. And Craig in particular had to get changed to 3 or 4 different rooms before he found a room that he was able to get his chair through the washroom door. Finally, it acknowledges that governments must sign, ratify, and implement the UN Convention and Protocol on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities to ensure that people with disabilities have better places to live in and visit, which goes back to the Cape Town Declaration. Recognizes that the inclusion of people with disabilities in tourism should be habitual rather than by special arrangement, and that people with disabilities also have the responsibility to make clear their requirements. So there's 2 folds on that one. As I mentioned, we have the Cape Town Declaration available on our ICRT Canada website, but specifically, if you wanted to download the full version of the Alberta Declaration, we have it available in both French and English. It's on the website listed on the slide here, which is rtd5.icrtcanada.ca. We also have all of the presentations from our speakers on that website, so you can see and hear what they had to say, because many of them are not here at this conference. And that is my contact information if you wanted to ask me further questions. Perfect timing.
Thank you very
The
much.
clock just ended.
Okay, thank you very much.